Yeah, and therefore to ask ourselves, where are our agendas so unrelational that they're pushing out the very essence of what is important to us, whether that's career, body, family, whatever.
What are your
So
thoughts about this passage for Sunday?
yeah, so passage for Sunday is Matthew 21:33 to 46. And this is where there is a vineyard owner who leaves it in the care of tenants and waltzes off to another country. And then when the season comes for the fruit to be born, sends a servant to collect. And they beat the servant and send him away empty-handed. They send another, and this one they hit over the head. They send another, and this one they kill, and this carries on until the owner, rather perhaps unwisely, says, "Oh well, I'll send my son. They'll respect my son." And they say, "Aha! This is the heir. Let us take him and kill him, and the inheritance of the vineyard will be ours." And that's just what they do. And I suppose for Jews of that time, they would not need to be told that any story about an owner and a vineyard is usually about God and his people. So Jesus is saying something here about God and his people. And the various elements of the parable, when he talks about the vineyard being fenced in, they could be fenced in by the Lord, grounded in the land, the chosen land, protected not by walls, but by the worship of God and the temple. And the people that the landowner sends to the tenants, they of course could be the prophets sent to call people to faithfulness. And then finally, of course, who does the owner send? Who does God send? But his son himself. And they reject the son. So there's something here that's fairly emphatic about the nature of who Jesus is in a parable of his, that he is quite distinct from the prophets in that his relationship to the vineyard owner, to God, is exceptional and different. And Jesus quotes Psalm 118, which says, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." In other words, their rejection of this stone, or the Son of God, will actually result in this Son of God being vindicated and becoming the cornerstone. In other words, the beginning of the new Israel, the new people of God who are centered on the person of Jesus. And this is just what happens. So it seems a fairly straightforward parable in terms of the allegory, in terms of what it means for us. But what are its implications for us here and now in terms of making a difference to who we are and how we are? Have you got any thoughts about that?
So I suppose, it's a judgment parable, isn't it? A story, and I think we need to hear the judgment ourselves and place ourselves in the position of the Pharisees and the elders that Jesus is addressing. And he says a bit later on in verse 23 that what has been given you will be taken away to those who will bear the fruits of the kingdom. So if we think about where are we seeing the fruits of the kingdom, and how do we respond to that and enable or participate in the growth of the fruits of the kingdom, when that may mean letting go or having things taken away from us that are inhibiting that growth. So I'm struck. As you are, we're doing little trips around the diocese to have distanced physical meetings with largely with clergy, but with lay leaders as well, in different deaneries, just to kind of have some contact. And I was at one earlier this week, which was, I have to say, it was an incredibly heartening experience. In a deeply rural part of the county, where the clergy, I met with 9 clergy, and they went round the room and basically talked about fruits of the kingdom. And we didn't necessarily use that language, but that's what they were talking about. And so they were talking about, I said to them, how are you feeling about, 6 more months of this? And one of them said, oh, excited. It was extraordinary. But what I heard was people talking about ways in which, through their online worship, their online study groups, through the way in which pastoral care networks had been developed, the way in which the food bank provision had been extended and so forth, they found themselves in a state of expansion rather than contraction. They were making more relationships. They were deepening relationships they already had. And all of that was, to me, was fruit of the kingdom. Now, all right, so this is the challenge. What if that's where God is calling us to? What do we need to let go of? And that's when we got into conversations about we can't maintain all our buildings. How do we do this? We can't maintain tiny worshipping communities in the way in which we have been in the past if we're also going to provide these online services and this extended engagement. We've got to do some things differently and let go of some of the practices that we've kind of taken for granted. But there was a clear sense that they could see increasingly what was getting in the way, and because they could see the fruit that was being borne through these other routes. And I think that's where I listen to this parable and think, okay, so this really is a challenge for us. What are we holding on to that we want to keep for ourselves that actually is preventing people see the fruits of the kingdom and sharing the fruits of the kingdom? And can we're going to have to be fairly hard-headed about it. And thinking about church buildings, that I am not a fan of closing churches, but I do think we need to find a different way to maintain the buildings, to release people in a local community for mission that may involve the building, but at the moment, all the energy is taken up in some of our communities, all the energy is taken up with keeping the building going, which is not what it's about in the end. So that's where I've linked up the parable with.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there's an analogy there with the parable, with the nature of how you what you're talking about is the prioritizing of relationships over kind of things, if you like, in the same way that the tenants refused to prioritize relationships over the thing of the vineyard. And in order to keep the vineyard for themselves, they actually dealt death rather than gave life to anybody who came near or by them. And it's important to stress with this parable that Jesus is not rejecting Israel per se in the parable, but the leaders who were actually leading the people astray by choosing to ring fence and be so possessive of this particular vineyard that actually it dealt death to others and prevented the very thing that they were supposed to be about in the first place, the flourishing of the fruit of the Spirit, as you're talking about, and those relationships to be realized.
And just to echo the point about relationships, I mean, the kingdom is about relationships. It's our relationship with God and one another. And the more we pay attention to that, the more we will see those fruits being born.
Yeah, and therefore to ask ourselves, where are our agendas so unrelational that they're pushing out the very, essence of what is important to us, whether that's career, body, family, whatever, what is pushing out the priority of our relating well to one another in and through the fruits of the Spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.